Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry to interrupt the music. just wanted to share you a few technical details before I hand over to Radu for the introduction of this conference. So I remind you, you are in an attendee mode, so we cannot hear you, we cannot see you. But if you want to ask questions, you can use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. And if you have any technical problem, you can contact us via the chat. This session is recorded and broadcasted on YouTube. So thanks a lot for joining, and I wish you a very good conference. Over to you, Radu.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me from a very windy and cloudy Brussels. Thank you very much for joining again the series of webinars. Unfortunately, obviously, due to the current situation, we had to change this from a meeting in beautiful Sicily to a virtual meeting. However, the good news is that this has allowed us to welcome a lot more people. Yesterday, we broke all previous records with over 400 people who connected. Can I please ask everyone to not use the question and answer for greetings? If you want anything, please use the chat. The question and answers is only for questions. And likewise, please do not use the chat to send in questions. So if you have any question to the panelists after the presentations, please use the question and answer and use the chat only for any technical problems, if you have any. Thank you very much. So going back to our meetings, we have a distinguished number of panelists today, and we will start with Robin Gurt, who began his training as an air traffic controller in Zurich with SkyGuide in 2009. And in addition to these operational activities in the Zurich control room between 2011 and 2015, he studied economics and psychology. He was active in the safety division as an internal incident and accident investigator. And then from 2016 to 2019, he headed the Department for Internal Reporting, Internal Safety Investigations, and Risk Reviews. During this time, he studied law as well. And since 2019, he has been working in his function as Counsel for Just Culture and Investigation Management, and he's also a member of the Eurocontrol Just Culture Task Force. I will not go into the details of what the Just Culture Task Force is. Suffice to say that in the Just Culture, we look very much at how to marry the Just Culture with the judiciary and of the different aspects of Just Culture, and it has been a very successful group for a number of years. So without further ado, Robin, it would be our pleasure to listen to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Radu, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From not so sunny Zurich, also quite cloudy, I will show my screen. Please, Radu, tell me once you can see it.
Yes, that's okay. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay. As we heard yesterday from our Italian colleagues, Andrea and Massimo, the judges, prosecutors and judges act according to their working instruction, which in our case usually is the penal code. I would like you to remember this because I will come back to this in a few minutes when talking about the implementation of just culture in the Swiss legal system. But to understand the current situation in Switzerland, we have to look back a few years in order that we can establish a fil rouge, whether it's a dream or a real opportunity to implement just culture in the legal system. SkyGuide had to face approximately 3 court cases over the past years. I will quickly show them and then we will move forward. So the first court case that we had was related to an incident happened in 2011 at Zurich Airport, where we had a double takeoff, two A320 aircraft on the crossing runways 28 and 16. An official investigation was conducted by the Swiss Aircraft Accident Investigation Body. After its completion, the district prosecutor opened the case, and it came to court. In December 2016, so 5 years after the incident, we had an acquittal for the air traffic controller. The prosecutor appealed against this acquittal, and in December 2018, the Supreme Court ruled a verdict of guilty, which was basically a 90 daily rates monetary penalty on probation. We went into appeal again for the federal court, which is the highest court in Switzerland, and we reached in 2019 an acquittal, which was a big success for Skyguide and the aviation industry in terms of just culture. Number two, as well at Zurich Airport, we had a Saab 2000 aircraft departing on runway 28 and a light sports cruiser aircraft on final runway 16. Again, this was rated as a serious incident and was investigated by the Swiss Aircraft Accident Investigation Body. After the completion, again, the district prosecutor opened the case against the air traffic controller. This was only done then in March 2019 at the district court, where we had a verdict of guilty as well, again, a 90 daily rates monetary penalty on probation. We filed an appeal against this verdict, and the next court session at the Supreme Court is foreseen for February 2021, 9 years after the incident. Court case number 3 is related to an incident that happened at the Area Control Center in Zurich for a loss of separation with a TCAS resolution advisory between a Boeing 737 from Ryanair and an Airbus 319 from Air Portugal. Also, this case was officially investigated by the STSB. Also, after completion of this investigation, the federal prosecutor opened the case. At the court in May 2017, the federal prosecutor ordered a verdict of guilty, which is possible in Switzerland, a daily rates monetary penalty on probation, which was about 20,000 Swiss francs. And in June 2018, we appealed against this verdict again, and this was confirmed by the Federal Criminal Court. Reduced to a 60 daily rates monetary penalty on probation. We filed again an appeal to the federal court, and there we lost the case, and there was a confirmation of the verdict. All these cases are related to Article 237 of the Swiss Penal Code, which is about disruption of public transport, which says any person that obstructs, disrupts, or endangers public traffic in the air or also on the roads and on water, and as a result knowingly causes danger to the life and limb of other people, is liable to a custodial sentence not exceeding 3 years or to a monetary penalty. Now, we do not talk about the gross negligence or willful misconduct part, but there is a second paragraph that says if it goes through negligence, the penalty is a custodial sentence not exceeding 3 years or a monetary penalty. In our cases, it was always a monetary penalty, not a custodial sentence. Again, referring to yesterday, Andrea, our judge colleague from Italy, explained that the law does not distinguish between gross negligence and negligence. That's also correct when it's about the applicability of this very article. It's a non-off principle. The article is being applied or not being applied. It cannot a little bit be applied or more be applied. As you know, just culture distinguishes between negligence and gross negligence, and that's where the main problem is for us. The bar set for acceptable behavior is set differently at the judicial world and in the industry world. The industry accepts certain behavior. When we look back to the 3 cases I explained to you, all these behaviors were seen as acceptable behaviors. All the ethicals are still working for Skyguide. But the law does not accept that anymore and comes up with a fine or a sentence. So what happened after the court decisions? We had quite some big media response in the print media, online media, also social media, on TV and also on radio, especially after the confirmation of the verdict at the federal court for the third case I showed you. Main reactions from the press, but also from the public were in favor of just culture, did not understand the confirmation of the verdict. And with this tailwind, we felt encouraged to initiate something. Somebody has switched on his microphone. I think either Rob or Tony.
It's okay. Please go ahead. I've managed it. Thank you, Gert.
It's all about safety and accountability. How do we balance that? And that's the core of just culture that we are talking about. And we identified quite quickly that it's not only controllers that can be faced with such a court case, it can also be pilots, it can be ground staff, it can be medical staff as well. And that's where we thought from Skyguide that something needs to be initiated, which is then the Just Culture platform that we founded last year in spring. After some of the verdicts, we found that we have to do something, we have to care about our people, and we have to look whether and how we can implement the Just Culture principles in the legal system. And that's what it comes from. So you can see it's called justculture.ch. The link is not working yet. It will come up in February. The website will be ready.
Robin,
that we came up with.
Robin,
yes.
I'm afraid we're losing a bit you in the audio. It has become very jittery and digitized. Okay. So I don't know if there is anything that you can do.
Maybe we can try to stop your video so to relieve a bit your computer from the bandwidth and turn it back on later on for the questions.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Not really.
Is it better now?
The quality is still the same. We still have issues.
How is it now?
Not a lot better.
Not better? Okay.
Let me try to share the screen from my side.
Okay.
Maybe you can stop sharing your screen.
I do.
Okay, good. Could we try again with you?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, Rob.
The quality is still a bit difficult.
Okay. I can't do anything right now here.
Yes, maybe we can try to move on to the next one, because otherwise we will be wasting a lot of time. And okay. You can disconnect and connect again, and we'll see how that works. Because we cannot really understand you, Robin. I'm really sorry about that.
Okay.
So apologies for this, but well, these are the conditions that we have to work with. So while we put that on hold for a little bit, we'll move on to the next speaker, who is Captain Rudy Pont. And Rudy, in his own words, is a funny guy with a funny name, but a bit more realistically, he's an Airbus 320 captain, currently flying from Brussels Airlines. So you can all, I'm sure, sympathize with him and with so many other colleagues around who are struggling to get the flight deck, because we know how the conditions are today. Rudy chairs the Air Safety Committee for the Belgian Cockpit Association and has a background in electromechanical engineering, plus more than 10 years safety experience as a deputy safety manager for Thomas Cook Airlines Belgium. His motto is people are safety, and he strongly believes in just culture, safety to human factors. He's also a member of the Eurocontrol Just Culture Task Force and the ECA Flight Data Working Group, an IFALPA director for Belgium, and has just recently finished a Masters of Science in Air Safety Management at the City University in London with the subject of managing a pragmatic just culture implementation. His name in French means bridge, so he sees himself as a bridge builder. And in his opinion, communication starts with understanding each other's viewpoint. Only then trust can grow. So Rudy, if you can start sharing your screen and talking in a better voice than Robin, we're sure that the presentation will be very interesting. So go ahead, please, Rudy.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Well, yeah, maybe a man of many traits, but also many perceptions about pilots, and I think that's about any profession. Here a small overview, and I think for now the problem is that we're actually sitting home and trying to do stuff like this and trying to promote just culture because we're not flying much. Reconnecting today. We all know that in aviation, we have a tremendous safety record. These are numbers from 2018. The numbers for 2019 were even better. 1.35 accidents per million flights. It's an incredible safety record. It's 10 to the -6th. And I think we can be very proud as an aviation sector to have reached that. I think there are a number of factors which have helped us to reach this. I'm thinking about standardization, I'm thinking about regulations, standard operating procedures, so SOPs, certification, training, compliance, etc., etc. If we plot these 46 million, or depending on the source, it sometimes differs a little bit, changes a little bit, 37 million flights in 2018, and you plot the number of accidents, of fatal accidents on that, it's quite small. 15 or 11, depending on the numbers. Indeed, 10 to the -6th. If you want to plot that on a pie chart, the problem is that it's going to be so small that I made the dot actually bigger than it actually is. And the reason for that, for this good safety record, is obviously we do all of these things. We try to understand what goes wrong, and then we put them in standards and put them in SOPs, and we consolidate that. We also measure what goes wrong, and we still define, a lot of us still define safety by counting things that go wrong. The only problem is that we run into a safety paradox, because what happens if the dot disappears, if we get to 0, what is obviously the ultimate goal? Can we then really say we are safe? If there's nothing more to measure, can we then claim that we are safe? It's quite difficult. And so that's why this whole safety paradigm has shifted a little bit, and something new has come up, and you all know that now there's also something called Safety 2, where actually, instead of trying to remove the red area, the red dot from the graph, we try to enlarge the green part. So instead of looking at things that go wrong, we try to look at things that go right, and we try to understand why things go right. And the only way to do that is actually to go and stand next to people and try understand how they are working, in which context they are working, and what ways they use to comply or to make sure that they can do their normal work. And sometimes it will be outside of the SOPs. In the cockpit, we have something called emergency authority. which basically says that for reasons of safety, we can always deviate from any rule that's in the book. And I sometimes explain when first officers ask me, what is the big difference of being on the right side, so being in the first officer position, the co-pilot's position, or on the left side, I tell them it's very easy. If you look to the left, there's nobody there. So I think, in my opinion, being a captain is much more clear-cut. It's easier in a sense that if you're faced with a problem or a situation, actually there are only two questions or two options you can choose. Either you follow the rule book, you follow the regulations or procedures or whatever, and then obviously you will be covered, or you decide not to follow them, and then you already have to think about, okay, how I'm gonna explain this if things go wrong, if I mess up and if it really goes bad. So safety 1, safety 2, looking at why things go right. We are not the only ones doing this, and I hope among the 400 participants in the webinar today, there are definitely people from rail transport. I'm sure that there will also be people from healthcare, oil and gas, and hopefully times not only aviation, all the industries are looking to make things better, to become safer. And I think this is one of the things about safety. There's no competition in safety. You can be the fiercest competitors, but if the safety departments talk to each other, they will share information, they will share their insights, training material, whatever, simply because in the end, we all want the same thing. We want less accidents, we want to understand why we are safe, and we want to make people resilient to sudden changes. So, okay, that's great. But we know in aviation, again, numbers from 2000 up to 2017, but it doesn't really matter because the trend is the same. We are almost reaching zero, but we never get to zero. And so what should we do? Because on the one hand, we have a lot of SOPs. So should we have less procedures, less regulations, or should we instead have more regulations and put more rules in the world? Well, let's have a look. First of all, let's take a look at having less regulations, because we actually are already doing that. And this is a picture, obviously, from before the COVID crisis, where the industry said that, oh, we don't have enough pilots because the traffic demand will rise. It will double every 15 years. And we don't have sufficient people. What we saw as ECA, as the European Cockpit Association, is that actually there were already a lot of student pilots and cadet pilots on the market, people that obtained their license through training and were certified to fly. But once they applied and spent a lot of money, I must say as well, because a training costs easily 100,000 euros without any guarantee of work for most of them. So these people obviously wanted to get a job real bad. What we had, a lot of them never found a job, simply because standards and the tests that they have to go through within the airline themselves were apparently too high, or the standard of their training was not sufficient. So we plead that in terms of training, there's a holistic approach. We plead that there are standards put in place across all of the training centers and across the industry to make sure that the quality of people not only depends on their purse, not only depends on how much money they pay, but actually that there's some sort of a pre-screening, that these people don't have to spend money if it's clear that maybe they are not apt to become a pilot, and to make sure that once they've entered into the system, that they reach a level which is acceptable by the airlines and where they can really flow through. Another example is fatigue. Back in 2014, in Europe, there were new flight time limitations introduced, and ECA was a big fighter for a scientific approach. The industry lobby, or well, In the end, it was decided not to use a scientific approach and to have one fixed set of rules, and then to put something aside when wanted to go beyond the rules, that there needed to be some sort of a fatigue report management system. So making sure that if you exceeded the flight time limit, that this fatigue would be monitored. What we see is that early 2019, so 1.5 years ago, EASA came out with a study, and it showed that especially on night flights exceeding 10 hours, the FTLs still, even if airlines operate within the flight time limitations, people were fatigued. And so we had fatigued people in the cockpit. At the same time, a little bit before, there was a study from the London School of Economics surveying over 7,000 pilots, and 6 out of 10 pilots claimed that they had fatigue issues, or they saw problems with fatigue within their company. The problem is that only 2 out of 10 thought that the company took this seriously. So again, less regulations on what need to be done, and so a lot more freedom in choosing the options. As an example of maybe the pressure, I'm going to read this for you. This is so a reply from management to one of the pilots a safety report. So I just read the bottom line. Safety is #1 priority, and we have an exemplary 34-year record. As you are aware, we treat all safety reports with utmost importance. Our safety service office reviews every ASR, so air safety report submitted at the daily meeting, and appropriate follow-up action is taken. Regrettably, over the summer period, received a number of alleged fatigue reports, which had no reasonable or no operational basis, and arose from duties that were well within our rostering and FTL limits. So basically the company is saying, we are well within the limits, we're well within the regulations, that's not really a problem. These appear to have been directly linked to an industrial relations agenda. So they basically say, you're writing a report because you want to make a statement on the industrial side, so on syndical side, let's say, union side. And you will understand that our safety reporting system must recognize the difference between genuine and bogus reports and respond appropriately. So you can imagine if you receive such an email, maybe not you personally, but even your colleagues around, will you be inclined to write another fatigue report? I don't think so. So quite difficult atmosphere. The thing is that obviously we need data. That is for sure. And we see a lot of initiatives. For example, Day2 tries to capture multiple sources of data and put them together in order to analyze this and to make sure that we see trends for the future. It's comparable to the SIAS program in the United States, or at least it wants to become comparable to that, because obviously this Day2 project is still in the pilot phase. But having data and analyzing them obviously is quite important. This is the safety one part. But to really understand what's going on behind the data, you also need to talk to people. You need to understand what's happening in the field. And so you need this other approach where you stand next to people and ask, okay, what is going on? And I'm a big fan of having much more qualitative research done or analysis done in aviation and in analyzing reports than we do today. Give you a small example. A lot of companies measure their reporting rate. Well, I can tell you some companies even link reporting rate to a bonus. I don't have to tell you that the quality of the reports will be far from ideal. So my proposal would be, why don't we measure the quality of the reports? And I know it's a lot more difficult. Qualitative research takes a lot more resources, but I think the value in it afterwards will be much greater. That doesn't mean we don't have to do the core data analysis. That's absolutely true. And I remember Tony saying, it's not because you're doing safety 2, right? You're looking at why things go right, that you don't have to do safety 1. They're complementary. You can do both. The thing is also that having less regulations is often covered under the term performance-based oversight. Basically, the idea behind performance-based oversight is that in our case, the organizations are much closer to their risks than the regulator. So it makes sense that whenever they see a risk, they can act immediately and appropriately, and say that they don't have to wait for any legislation or rules or regulations to be published before they can act. Unfortunately, the other side of that is that we see that it also needs competent oversight, because instead of sending auditors which would check compliance with a number of rules and regulations, now a lot of authorities say, listen, we will do oversight, just send us your numbers every month. We will look into them. And if there's something which is alarming, please advise us. I'm not sure if that is absolute the way it should work if you don't have competent people. I'm absolutely convinced that performance-based regulations can work, but you need absolutely competent oversight as well. A number of examples of let's say performance-based oversight which resulted in de facto self-regulation. BP, Deepwater Horizon, the Macondo well, which exploded back in April 2010. Everybody knows about the catastrophe. Just before, BP was actually doing a very, very good job. They didn't have any fatal accidents or incidents. I think that it was really a few years before, until that point, a few years long, they didn't have any issues, and all of a sudden, poof, this happened. So a prime example of an industry or an event where the regulator says, okay, you're doing a really good job, there's no need, and then obviously the latent conditions creeped in, and there was operational drift, and then all of a sudden everything exploded. Another example, financial crisis of 2008, where we see that the big banks are taking huge risks on mortgages which were not financially sound or built upon other mortgages. We all know what happened next. And then obviously the last 2 years, we had the Boeing 737 MAX crisis. And I just want to make sure that we're not bashing we're not trying to bash Boeing here. This is probably an industry-wide problem. The commercial pressure is on everywhere. And I think if you talk to family, friends, they definitely will tell you that in their company, it's less money available or less resources available and more work to do. So this is not specific to aviation. I think it's much wider than that. It's not specific to Boeing. It's much wider than that. It's really the world we live in today. Commercial pressure is taking over, and especially it's all money we're talking about. Okay, that was less regulations. So what about having more regulations? Maybe that's a good solution. Okay, let's have a look. When I go to work, when I get into the flight deck, I have a number of procedures that I have to know. Most of these are captured in the operations manual, so OM, and we have different parts in that operations manual. First of all, there's the OM part A, which actually describes in general terms everything that the company does, quite broad. In my company, it's 860 pages. Then I have an operations manual B, which describes what are the aircraft specific things I have to take care about. 328 pages. I also have an OMC, which talks about routings and airports and communication loss, for example, related to different countries, because it's not always the same. The first 834 pages. Obviously, we have our flight crew operations manual, which basically is the manual of operating the airplane. In our case, 5,500 pages almost. I changed the pictures there. I saw the flight crew training, or sorry, techniques manual. It's become now 454 pages. Then we have notices to airmen, which are basically telex messages telling about runways that are not operational, or lights or beacons that are out of service, which can affect the flight. Company NOTAM, so specifically to the company, also different NOTAMs. Company must read, so reminders of procedures that might have been forgotten or not applied. And then obviously we all have the charts, including the airport operational information, which is there. If I count all of these, not including the NOTAMs, I get around 8,000 pages. 8,000 pages that are not fixed, because every 28 days, things may change. And so I have to keep track of all of these things once I get into the cockpit and start a flight. I have to make sure that everything is taken care of. It's quite a challenge, and luckily we nowadays have electronic tablets, which facilitate life a little bit, because it's we no longer have to carry around paper bags, but it's now nicely in one tablet. The only problem with the tablet is sometimes you're searching for something and it's not yet adapted. So what happened is that the operations manual was just digitized. And if you're searching for a specific term, maybe they use just a different term with a letter difference, and then you don't find what you're looking for. So still some improvement to do, but it's going the right way. The only problem is it's a lot. It's really a lot, and you really need to know it. The reason for this is simple. Most organizations and even authorities try to cover themselves and put it in umbrella. If I make a procedure, at least they know about it. And I'm not off the hook, but at least I've informed, and so this will happen. The problem is we get so many procedures that we're overburdened with procedures. And another consequence is that if it's black on white, it's quite easy afterwards to say, hey, but you didn't follow the rule. It's quite clear that it says here, you have to switch on, I don't know, the lights below 10,000 feet. You didn't do that. And because of that, it was a contributive factor to near miss or whatever. But it's clearly here. So why didn't you do it? Because I had to read 8,000 pages. I'm not pleading for the fact that I shouldn't read my 8,000 pages. Just trying to tell you that from my perspective, we have to look at the context. I saw a presentation, I think 3 years ago from EasyJet, and they do 4 or 5 sectors a day. And they say every time we go to a different destination, we have to go to the airport operational information, and it's maybe 5 pages. But if you go to 5 different ones, it's 25 pages. And it's all different, but it's always the same structure. So we get confused by that because it's so much information. Okay. So on the one hand, under-regulation, performance-based oversight, for example, and on the other side, over-regulation, putting more and more procedures, rules, regulations in place. Okay. So where do we have to go? Do we have to do less? Do we have to do more? Do we stick with the same? Luckily, there are some examples of people and organizations already trying to change and to shift things. Was a great presentation of Sebastian Downert back in 2016, I think. There was an article published in Hindsight 25 in the summer of 2017, where he talked about the extra runway, the 4th runway they built in Frankfurt. So the new runway was at the top. This is the new one they built. But the problem actually they had already for a number of years were actually in the middle. So if you see these 2 runways, 2.5 left, you see 2.5 and then a small L, and a 2.5 center here. The problem is that if an aircraft lands here, so this runway is used for landing most of the time, the 25 center is used for takeoff. You see it's standard instrument departure. And due to environmental reasons, aircraft need to turn to the left quite early. You see that this can give a problem in case of a missed approach. So in case that the aircraft cannot land and it needs to take off again or not land and just fly straight ahead at the same time that there's a departure. This might cause a problem. I'm not an air traffic controller, and one of the things that I've learned in the prosecutor expert course is to stick with your own profession, but I'll give it a try anyway. The thing is that in normal operations, when an aircraft lands here, the terminal actually is here. These aircraft, some way or another, they need to cross this runway to get to the terminal. And so the normal procedure was that every runway has its own frequency. And so when an aircraft landed here, it had to hold in between the runways and then contact, obviously, the other frequency to make sure that there was no aircraft taking off from this runway before they crossed here. With the extra runway, it actually complicated a bit things because there was even more traffic and also on the back here. So there was a question, can the air traffic controller, would it be easier that he has control over two runways, or that it's easier? And there were a lot of pros and a lot of cons, and they went through really difficult discussions. And one of the scenarios they tried was to map in a flowchart all of the different possibilities. And in the end, they decided this is no use. We just cannot solve the problem. It's too complex. There's too many factors influencing. And what they decided was really interesting. They decided to go for a pilot project for 1 year where they gave back autonomy to the controllers and actually told the controllers, listen, you can choose to coordinate two runways, always with somebody as a backup in case you need them, but it's your authority. So in this case, instead of putting it in rules, authority was given back to the human operator. And apparently it went very well, and this actually proved to be the solution for Frankfurt Airport. And I think it was a great example. Obviously, Sebastian can tell it much better than I do. I recommend to look up the Hindsight article. It's splendid. Another example is briefings. This is the briefing about week, and I will. How much time am I doing on time? Because I didn't see once I started. David. David. Okay, I will just continue.
I'm looking at the time. Yes.
Okay. When we do a briefing in the cockpit, I will just go through it so you can hear what we actually have to say. So we're flying Airbus 320. So imagine you're the co-pilot listening to my briefing. Flying Airbus 320, Oscar Sierra Sierra Alpha. There's nothing in the MEL today. We have one OEB. Hydraulic, which we cannot switch the we have to switch the PTU if we lose one hydraulic. The no times, nothing special except there's one runway closed in Jerez, for example. The weather is nice, the runway is wet, so we will put the engine and wing NTIs on because the temperature is below 10 degrees. We do a normal engine start, pushback facing to the east, taxi via the inners, and then Bravo 1 to holding point runway 25 right. We'll put the weather radar on. Terrain off, the terrain on as per SOP, packs off. And then on the init B page, and then we'll switch to this page, you'll see we have a takeoff, a zero fuel weight of 123. It's obviously too much for an Airbus 320, but that doesn't matter. That means we have a takeoff weight of that, landing weight of that, and an extra time of 40 minutes, for example. The takeoff performance page, V1 137, 137, 138, flex temperature 49, engine out acceleration is 1470, the green dot 224, and the stop margin will be around 85 meters. We're flying the Chèvre for Charlie today, straight at 700 feet, right turn heading track 278 to intercept the 225 to Chèvre. Thrust reduction altitude, as I said, 1500. And then in case of Voilà, that's about it. Minimum safe altitude is 2,200. The first altitude is flight level 60, so 6,000 blue on the PFD. And then on the RAPNAV, we've put Brussels, Chèvre, and Oscar Papa in case we come back. In case of normal operations, in case we failed before V1, I'll call stop or go. In case we stop, I will stop the aircraft, you monitor thrust, reverse, and decel. Once stopped, I put the parking brake on, attention cabin crew on station twice. You call ATC on my command, then I take the com. ECAM actions. In case of failure after V1, we continue, positive climb, gear up, no actions before 400 feet, as from 400 feet, the aircraft under control. We continue straight ahead, standard AFP, as from 1700 feet, engine secured. We ask for a right-hand turn to come back, climbing 3000 Brussels, come back on the 2.5 right. The specials, we have some crosswind today, so we'll use the crosswind technique for takeoff. Are there any questions, suggestions, or remarks? That's a standard briefing. It's quite a lot of information. And the problem is if you do this 3 times a day, then especially on your home base, then the first officer on the other side or vice versa, the captain will say, I've heard this so many times, so I'm not really listening anymore. And maybe interesting information can get lost. And this is a problem that not only exists in my airline, it's everywhere, but with Alaska Airlines, they decided to do something different. And at the Eurocontrol Safety Forum back in 2018, Alaska Airlines presented the new way of briefing. They call it briefing better. Again, a lot of resistance experienced while implementing this, but also people involved. So a lot of pilots were questioned on what do you think about this? How should we adapt the briefing? Should we take things out? Should we put things in? And actually what they've done is quite interesting. First of all, it's the pilots monitoring. So basically that will not be flying who starts the briefing, identifying the threats. And secondly, and I think that is interesting, all of the normal things that already have been briefed on a previous leg. And for example, you do an up and down and then you leave for another destination. Well, if you're at the same airport, you don't have to brief it twice. You can just say, we already discussed that before. So here are the specials. These are the things that are most important. These are the hazards we can expect. And this is the way we're going to solve them. It's scalable. And I think this is really an excellent way of approaching. It's really listening to people, trying to understand what they're experiencing every day. So my big conclusion or my big suggestion to everybody here is make sure that you connect to people. Make sure that you understand the frontliners. Make sure that you understand the work as done and not the work as you imagine it. And I think especially in these times, this will be even more important. And I know that in times of crisis, a lot of times organizations, they fold back almost. They say, oh, let's stick to what we know and don't change anything. But I think especially now, this is the time where we really have to understand what's going on, because the commercial pressure nowadays will only grow. And I think if everybody is trying to survive, if it makes money, let's do it. So that's my main message. Please connect. If there are any questions, I'm open.
Thank you very much, Rudy. And a virtual round of applause for you and all of the interesting information that you have given us. I'm surprised by how accurate your memory is with the previous event and how you remember who said what and when. We can barely remember what we said yesterday, but I guess that's what makes you a captain. We have a couple of questions. I would take 2 of them together. There's a question that is wondering whether the big amount of regulations has led to a successful results in the safety area, like the lowest rate of accidents in 2018, or rather than that makes, for example, controllers reluctant to offer more in the area of efficiency, which results in continuous pressure on delay reduction, better performance. I know you're not a controller, but I guess that would apply to you as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's always a balance. there's no black and white answer. It's always a balance, and I think it's different for each and everyone. I think everybody has its own limits, or has his own limits, and I think that's for air traffic controllers, that's for pilots, but that's also for surgeons, that's for people probably working on the railways. Some will say, okay, this is a level of pressure, commercial pressure, where I'm comfortable with, and others will say, no, this is my limit, so I won't go beyond that. And it is indeed not always easy to call the stop. I think this is exactly the reason. If I look into the cockpit, this is what a captain must do. The flying stuff, etc., etc. It's quite logical, or it speaks for itself that people can fly. But I think the most difficult thing is to say stop whenever you feel that limits are being crossed. And I do admit sometimes you also make a mistake by letting it go too far, or having pressured yourself too much. And then afterwards you think, oh my God, that was a bad day, and that was a bad decision. And that is what's called experience. And that is also something my instructor used to say: if you start flying, you begin with an empty bag of experience and a full bag of luck. And the idea is to fill the bag with experience before the bag of luck runs out. So again, that's another item in the context. So no, it's not always easy to draw the line.
Yes, I think you're preempting the next question from Didier Morin, who's saying that there is a strong tendency to introduce more performance regulation. And the question then is, what happens if there are failures to comply with safety objectives, like the accident? And for example, the EASA is asking to monitor and set specific internal rules for night flights above 10 hours. If there is an accident, who's accountable? The airline, the pilot, the regulator?
Yeah, very difficult question. I don't have an answer to that. And I think in the end, when there's really blood on the runway, it will probably be up to the judiciary to decide. And yeah, then you really need the context to understand what happened.
Yes, indeed. These are things that only the judiciary can make the final call, and that's why it's important that we never get there, because just culture pretty much flies out the window when there is an accident. In spite of everything that we need to do, then the pressure, the societal, the political, the economical pressure is so high that it's difficult to maintain a straight face and saying, well, there is just culture here, so we will not prosecute, we will not go for anyone. And then I'm afraid all bets are off. So that's why we concentrate on prevention much more than on curing. Thank you very much, Rudy. Always a pleasure to having you. I think we can switch back, hopefully, to Robin. If you're back with us, Robin, can you confirm?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now a bit better?
We can hear you very well now.
Good. I changed to my iPad, but now you would have to run the presentation, please.
Okay. Give me just a second.
Yes.
I will do that. And we will start again from where you left it. I think this is where you were.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you very much. Please apologize the inconvenience about the technical problem.
It's no blame. It's no blame. It's just culture here. We'll blame the system.
Good.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I explained beforehand that after the court verdicts, we aligned with our partners in the aviation industries to the Just Culture platform or how it was formerly called, Just Culture campaign. The goals we set in this platform are to align the actions on Just Culture, to have a shared view on Just Culture as well, and to achieve most possibly results in everybody's interest. The overall goal that we set to ourselves is to achieve an implementation of the principles of Just Culture in the Swiss legal system within a realistic time frame in cooperation with our partners and the judicial authorities. And here, I mean, we closely work also with our regulator, the FOCA, which is very supportive in this regard. Can you please switch to the next slide, Radu? So we work with the National Aero Club, we work with the associations for pilots and air traffic controllers, also IFATCA is on board. We work with the major airports, Zurich and Geneva, with the major carriers, Swiss, Edelweiss and so on, and with Rega, the Hems flight company in Switzerland. These are the partners who collaborate in terms of Just Culture. We have the same goal to achieve the principles of Just Culture in the Swiss legal system. We tried beforehand to discuss with the judiciaries, with federal prosecutors, with local prosecutors, and it's like Andrea and Massimo said yesterday, they understand completely Just Culture principles, and they also would like to apply it, but they have another work instruction, which is the penal code that they have to follow. Basically, they follow the overall public's interest, and this is to go after an individual. So if we want to change that, we need to change the book they have to work with. Next slide, please. So after these court decisions, we had also quite some reactions from politicians, from the parliament, who wanted to initiate a change because they also saw that Just Culture is very solid in the aviation industry, and it's at stake if we have punishments after incidents with no damages to property or life and limb. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in September last year, one politician handed in a parliamentary initiative, which is one of the instruments that can be used to change the law, which the title is Improving Public Safety by Implementing Just Culture. That was the first attempt to do something like implementing Just Culture in the Swiss legal system. And it basically requests an amendment of the Swiss Penal Code, of this famous Article 237, which basically amends a third paragraph that says that no punishment should happen if the case has been reported and if there is no gross negligence or willful misconduct. Now, it's still in the judge's view whether there is gross negligence or normal negligence. So we will still have a court case, but the judge has a possibility to come up with an acquittal if there was normal negligence, like we granted as well when applying Just Culture. The same is for the Aviation Act. Also there an amendment is proposed for the same reasons, and also for the Aviation Ordinance, to have a balance check whether safety information can be used by the prosecutor or not, which is also requested by the 996/2010, which Switzerland did not yet implement. And also there is an amendment requested to the act related to the Swiss Transportation Safety Investigation Board, also related to the 996/2010. There it's mainly about usage of safety information and how it can be better protected. So that's what has been proposed in September 2019. Next slide, please. Here again, the article that is meant. So basically there is a third paragraph then added that says that if there is no gross negligence or no willful misconduct, the judge can say it's an acquittal. Next slide. Where is it now? You can see here a sketch of how the workflow is. So we have the submission of the parliamentary initiative by the parliamentarian Gregor Rutz to the legal commission of the National Council, which was accepted in February 2020 by 22-0 votes. So a big commitment for Just Culture. They also saw the need and recognized the need that we have to do something in Switzerland in relation to just culture. Afterwards, it goes to the second chamber, or it went to the second chamber, which is the legal commission of the Council of States. There, they had a very good discussion as well on just culture as a whole, and they came up with a decline 7-4. The reason behind was that they also agree that there is a need for something to do in just culture in Switzerland, but the proposal that has been submitted by Gregor Rutz is too specific for the aviation field. They would like to have something more broad also for the other industries like healthcare sector, railway, and so on. So it's not yet over. It now goes back to the National Council somewhere next year for a final vote, whether they want to keep it or whether they want to destroy it. We will see what happens. We don't know yet. But it's not yet over, but at least they also recognize that there is something to do. And they did a counter proposal. Next slide. So the legal commission of the Council of States basically said that as it considers that the parliamentary initiative is not the right way forward, however, it has adopted a postulate to instruct, which is another instrument to amend the law, to instruct the Federal Council, so the government, to examine the question of anchoring this principle in Swiss law. That is then more broadly. And the postulate says basically the Federal Council is instructed to examine how the principle of a just culture can be introduced into Swiss law as a general principle in aviation, healthcare, or other high security areas. And this is where we are now. Next slide. Now, if we look a bit forward, we have some challenges ahead of us in the political stream, but also on the expert stream. Next slide. So the parliamentary initiative is still ongoing. We will have a next vote probably in the second quarter next year. Now they are busy with COVID, but we foresee that it will be managed in the second quarter next year. The postulate is submitted and will be monitored by the platform, but also by SkyGuide. We will also see how we can take influence in the management of this postulate. The Just Culture platform Switzerland becomes visible under www.justculture.ch in February 2021. That's the plan. And we also foresee to have a study with a legal and socio-cultural university in regard to just culture to supplement and support the postulate that has been submitted by the Council of States. It means that we have to be patient, but patience is not the ability to wait, but how you act while you are waiting. And with these words, I would like to close and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin. So we can now look a little bit if we have questions. Yes, there is one question. Is there any country? I have to understand exactly what the question is. Have a just culture accepting regulation. So I guess the question would like the gentleman would like probably to know if there is any country where there is a regulation or a legislation accepting a just culture. I guess Switzerland will be one good example. So maybe you can dwell on that a little bit, Robin. Essentially, what would that legislation say if it passes the way it's proposed now?
We have to say that the parliamentary initiative that I described before was very, very specific, related to aircraft and incident investigation and the follow-up by the judiciary. Now, the postulate that has been submitted is much broader, and it will be very, very demanding for the Federal Council to come up with a proposal on how to implement just culture in the Swiss legal system as a whole, because it's not only the punishment or the penal thing that is behind, but also liability that goes along with it and so on, which all needs to be addressed. And I expect this to last a few years until they will come up with a proposal. Now we know that Denmark, for example, has a good way of dealing with it. We know that England has a good way of dealing with just culture. We know that the Dutch have a good way. They found another way to do it. They do have this agreement with the prosecutor that they discuss each case before bringing it up in front of court and so on with the industry. Also, this could be a possibility. Our goal is, because we tried this before, we had the discussions with the judiciaries and they always said, yes, we understand you, but we can't do what you want because we have another procedure to follow, which is the penal code. So if we want to have that changed, we need to change the penal code in the end, and that's what we try to do now.
Okay, we still have a few minutes, so we can take a couple of other questions. A quick one, do you have support from other industries such as healthcare?
We are looking at that, but the focus clearly is on the aviation for the time being, because if we open it to railway, for example, which has also a big interest in that, or also healthcare, they are faced with other problems as well. And we thought that it would be good to go as a spearhead for the aviation, because just culture is very well established in our field already, whereas the healthcare maybe is not so sophisticated yet. So we have a case to show, and if we can go forward and implement something for the aviation, there might be also a call then for healthcare and railway later on to follow.
Okay. How do you plan to manage the difficulty of defining whether the behavior falls into an area of negligence or gross negligence? Maybe if you can give an example that would fall into gross negligence.
That's a very good question. In the end, it will still be the court and the judge who will need to decide whether it was gross negligence or negligence. How we define it at Skyguide is if a person has done a honest mistake, we assess it like if the majority of controllers who have the same training and the same experience would have acted the same way, then it's acceptable behavior. If it's completely outside of what other controllers would have done, then we are in the unacceptable behavior.
Thank you. Something that is close to home, and we're somewhat similar in this. Skyguide is the multinationality employer. So you have controllers from different nationalities. Has that affected the legal analysis somehow? Who bear the legal costs of the appeals? And did the article continue working while being investigated? And who exactly appealed?
It's the controller. It's always against individuals. So in the end, it's the controller with his lawyer who has to file the appeal. But it was always supported by Skyguide as the company. We also supported during the court case with expertise. We also called Eurocontrol for an expertise and so on. So the company here is very supportive and tries to do its best. But in the end, it's the ETCO himself who needs to decide whether or not he wants to go for an appeal.
Right, and there is also, I suppose, psychological, social support for the controller.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And the last question, although we still have time, in one of the slides, you mentioned accessing safety data. Maybe you can give more details around that process?
It's not established in Switzerland. In Switzerland, it works as follows. So safety investigation, the official safety investigation has priority usually. And once this is concluded, they hand over the final report, including all gathered information and data, to the prosecutor for his use. So here they avoid to have a fight between criminal investigation and safety investigation. what is requested by the 996 and what would make sense in terms of having a good safety culture and also protect the safety culture would be to have a balance check whether or not safety data and information should be revealed to the criminal investigation. And this would be also then balancing safety and accountability. If there is a first assessment that the actions being done by the controller or by the pilot are maybe a bit suspicious, then a criminal investigation should be opened. If it's fully in line with trust culture, then there is no need that safety data and information which has been gathered for the sole purpose of improving safety should go to the prosecutor.
All right, thank you. We have a couple of questions dealing more or less with the same thing, which is the penalty and the costs associated with that for the individuals, whether they're pilots or controllers, and is there any protection, is there any assistance, because they may not go to jail in the end, but they may be bankrupt. And I also remember in one of your, I think it was one of your presentations, that they could lose their job in a way indirectly, because if they get a penal sentence, they may lose their security clearance after that. So they're perfectly qualified to work, but they would not have, they would not be permitted to access the airside premises, whether it's a tower or an airplane, because now they have a criminal record.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was one of the questions we had when the acquittal was skipped and turned into the condemnment, and we went to the regulator quite quickly afterwards and discussed with them whether or not this is an issue for the security clearance. And they clearly said, no, this offense is not related to an issue with security clearance. If it would, because these were all incidents, we had no dead people, we had no damage to property. It was only disruption to public transport, which is a minor issue if you want to call it from a judiciary point of view. If we would have an accident when it's about manslaughter or whatever, it might be a different story. This we don't know. I still foresee that the regulator would still be very supportive if it is in line with just culture. But you still have it in your criminal record, and if you want to change your flight or whatever, there might be an issue. There we can't do anything against it, unfortunately.
Right, a quick one. Are you in contact with the Italian association that is following a similar path?
Not yet, no.
Okay, maybe then you can get in touch with them. Marcello, this comes from Marcello Scala, our friend Marcello Scala. Maybe there's something to be done there. And a last one, in your view, do you think the findings in the course of safety investigations of major accidents, such as those that we had maybe in the past 20 years, not only in aviation, but in other areas, might influence the just culture understanding of the judiciary?
Absolutely. That's what we have been claiming for years now. How such a report is written clearly influences a prosecutor who usually has no idea about aviation, whether or not to open a case. This is clear for us, even though the judiciary always say, no, we do our own mind, we make up our own mind and so on, but still they read the report, they have a view from a neutral perspective from the national investigation body, and this clearly influences whether or not to open a case.
Thank you very much. So with all that, a big round of applause, virtual applause for you, Robin, and it's really gripping to follow the evolution in Switzerland. And if you guys are successful, and there's no reason to believe that you wouldn't be successful, you will become really a model for the future. And we really need this kind of models, because we have been able to influence here and there the thinking and the action by showing such models. So good luck with it. Fingers crossed that it all goes well. And so thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you very much, Robin.
And congratulations for the way you handled this. Even in spite of the slight technical problem, we're a little bit ahead of the time, so everybody will be able to get a few extra minutes of break. It is now time to take a small break. We will be back at past, according to the agenda. So in approximately 14 minutes, with a presentation from Trish on the just culture in other continents. That would be extremely interesting to follow. So please do not disconnect. Just remain with your microphones on mute and the cameras on off. We will be back at past. Music, David, please.
I'll put music if you want.
Okay, right on the dot. Welcome back, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the first part of the webinar and you managed to have a good cup of coffee, or like me, maybe a good tea. And it is now a great pleasure to welcome Miss Trish Demasi, who is a guest from overseas. So we thank you very much, Trish, for waking up early to join us. She's the manager of Aviation Safety Action Programs, known as ASAP, and the corporate SMS for Delta Airlines, at its world headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. She has oversight of voluntary employee safety reporting programs that collect and analyze data from over 40,000 voluntary safety reports each year. And she has recently assumed responsibility for the airline's SMS, so quite a big responsibility. Before joining Delta in 2011, Trish spent 9 years at a low-cost carrier, which I suppose is not Ryanair, the last 3 as the ASAP manager. She has also worked as an auditor in the internal evaluation program and as an on-call investigator. Trish has served on various industry committees, including Airlines for America Flight Safety Committee, the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing, known as ASIAS, Issue Analysis Team. She's a regular speaker at the Airline Pilots Association Risk Management course in Washington, D.C. Trish has received a Bachelor of Science Management degree from Merville University in St. Louis, Missouri, and resides with her husband and 2 huskies in Peachtree City, Georgia. So let's welcome Trish. If you're there, Trish, please tell us that you're there.
I am here. I am
great,
here.
Great.
Thank you.
Let me start your presentation, and then it's off to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to all our friends and colleagues across the pond. It's not too early here. It is 10:30 a.m. So I did not have to get up too early this morning. But first of all, I want to extend my gratitude and gratitude of Delta Airlines for the invitation to participate in this incredible conference. I've heard about it before, and to be a part of it is quite an honor. So thank you. Thank you. But before I start to talk about the journey for just culture at Delta and Aeromexico, I want to first apologize on behalf of Captain Curzio, who had planned to present with me. However, he has his annual recurrent training on the aircraft that he flies, so he was unable to reschedule that. And so I will be speaking on behalf of both Delta and Aeromexico today. Before we get into our journey, I'd like to talk a little bit about the background of just culture and how that's evolved in US aviation. It wasn't that long ago, that maybe 25, 30 years ago, that we waited for something to go wrong. And as soon as something went wrong, we searched for the perpetrator. We blamed them. We made some new rules, wrote some new regulations, and we moved on until the next incident or accident happened. And we learned through our voluntary safety programs that I'll speak about the importance of going beyond what happened, pointing out the perpetrator, and truly investigating why it happened. And the only way to get to the why it happened is through open, honest dialogue with the individuals involved. But we're all human beings, and we all know that when we're under the spotlight, as we say, where we're being investigated, there's that fear of punitive action, the fear of enforcement action from, in our case, the FAA, the fear of, we see this with our children, the fear of getting in trouble. Well, you better tell me the truth. You'll be in less trouble if you tell me the truth than if you lie, right? How many parents have said that? So in the aviation system, we have developed protections for those who submit safety reports when they're involved in incidents. And those protections come from both the companies and from the FAA. And they're available to aviation employees as long as the incident does not include what I think are obvious things like use of drugs, alcohol, criminal activity, falsification, or we use the term reckless conduct. So if you could go to the next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about the background, and I don't expect you to be able to read what's on these slides, but if you focus on the colors and where I have the arrows, overall, the primary mission of the FAA is to promote aviation safety in the US. But back as far as 1975, the FAA realized the best way to understand what was really happening in the system was to ask those involved, ask those on the front line that are doing it every day. But again, there was that fear of, will people really be honest? If there's a possibility they could be subject to possible enforcement action from the FAA or punitive action from their employers, if they may not come forward and be honest. So in partnership with NASA, the FAA instituted the first voluntary reporting program in the US. And that was back in 1975. And that's the bottom blue line on the chart that you see there. And if you look at the below, you can see the accident rate and the fatality rate. And this is across all of aviation, not just commercial aviation in the US, starting back then. The role NASA played in this was critical because it took away that fear of punishment, that fear of enforcement from the FAA, because NASA is the organization that's actually receiving these reports, that was processing the reports, analyzing that data, and ensuring the anonymity of the reporter and all the parties involved in these incidents and occurrences. That consequently increased the flow of information. This started out with pilots, but it soon expanded to include maintenance technicians, ground employees, flight attendants, air traffic controllers. And that information started coming in and provided an opportunity to more effectively evaluate safety and efficiency or deficiencies in the system. The rules of that program were the FAA would not seek, nor would NASA release or make available to the FAA any information regarding the reporter or those involved. And in the history of this program, there's never been a breach of that confidentiality. So if we fast forward a little bit to 1995, and that's the, when I don't have an arrow on this one, I apologize. I just realized that when 1995, we introduced our flight operations quality assurance program, which again is a voluntary program with the FAA. Just like NASA reporting is voluntary, FOQA is a voluntary program where airlines are not required to have this, but we do. And that's actually like the flight data recorder, we are recording all of the activity on the aircraft throughout the flight. Millions of parameters in some cases are being recorded. And the premise of this program is the airlines use that flight information to analyze what's really happening out there in the system. How are we flying our aircraft? Are we flying them in compliance with our own rules and policies, with the regulations? The caveat being that information can never be used against the crew. As a matter of fact, there's only a very limited number of individuals within the organization that can identify who the crew is. I can speak for our organization where pre-COVID, unfortunately, we were operating about 1.2 million flights per year. And we had 5 people within Delta Airlines that could identify the flight information from an individual flight. And the reason we allowed that is for them to reach out to the crew and get more information. If we think about it, we call it FOQA, Flight Operations Quality Assurance. That's the airplane brain telling us what the aircraft was doing. But we don't know why it was doing that. And back to one of my first comments, we've got to get away from the what happened and focus on the why. The why is the pilot brain. So those 5 individuals at Delta have the ability to identify that crew, reach out and get more information about what they're seeing in the flight data. Shortly after FOQA was introduced in 1996, 1997, the FAA introduced the Aviation Safety Action Program, ASAP. And it also started out with just one pilot group at one airline and has expanded to where it is today with over 800 different ASAP programs available in the United States across over 200 companies that offer these programs to their employees. And then in 2008, air traffic controllers were given the opportunity to have their own ASAP program. And the beauty of that is air traffic controllers are now able to come forward confidentially and voluntarily and report on an incident in the system. At the same time, we might have a pilot report on that same incident, and we have an agreement with air traffic control where we will share reports on specific flights. So now we're starting to get, again, we know what happened. Now we're getting the ability to see why it happened, both from the controller side and from the pilot side. In the pink on this chart are, again, don't expect you to read them, but the pink lines indicate regulations that were put in place over the last 25 years or so that offer protections. Voluntarily submitted safety information is protected from public disclosure. We have the Freedom of Information Act in the US, where an individual or a party can request information from the federal government. These programs and this information is protected from disclosure under that. And again, the employees are protected from enforcement action from the FAA, and they are also protected from disciplinary action from their companies. So referring to the bottom of that chart again, if you look at the impact these programs have had in the US, just in the last, I'm doing public math, is that 35 years? Up until about 2015, you didn't see the words just culture in FAA documentation. But in 2015, they implemented a new program called the Compliance Program, which has taken the FAA not out of the enforcement business, but their focus is no longer enforcement. Their focus now is why. We're not going after the individual. We want to understand why. And when they investigate an incident, if the individual is deemed A, able to comply, and B, willing to comply, then the FAA chooses not to take enforcement action, perhaps implement corrective action if needed. And this is the first time we see the mention of just culture, but the foundation's been there since 1975. It's been a long journey. The next slide, please. So why just culture? We all know this, but we're all in critical industries prone to errors leading to something catastrophic. And we know perfection is just not attainable. If we look at the NASA, the Challenger explosion many, many years ago, if we look at the nuclear power plant, nuclear energy industry, it's not error-free. Nuclear power plants are held to a standard of 1 in 1 billion, but that's still 1 in 1 billion. That's not 100% reliable. And importantly, and this is something we think about at Delta and we strive for, employees do not come to work intent on making a mistake. Everybody wants to come to work, do a good job, go home the way they came to work without injury or without causing harm or damage to someone or something else. And most critical, and this is something that we occasionally still struggle with, is professional does not equal perfect. And I refer back to Captain Pont's presentation, and thank you, Rudy. You covered a lot of my points already. He's a professional pilot with thousands of hours under his belt and trained, and he knows 8,000 pages worth of information that he must comply with. He's a professional, but he's not perfect. He's human being, and humans are fallible, and that's critical to understanding just culture. Next slide. And what we have come to realize is our frontline employees, our flight attendants, our mechanics, our dispatchers, obviously our pilots, they are our first responders. They're our early warning system. They know what's going on every day, and they are the best voice to tell us what's really happening in the system. Again, the procedures as designed or the work as designed or the work as performed. Going back to professional does not equal perfect. If I had $1 for every time I've heard they've been trained, they know the procedure, I'd be retired and living on the Amalfi Coast. We can design perfect procedures, but if we're not out there on the front lines, we don't know if those procedures actually work. We don't know how they're being applied. We don't know the obstacles and the other challenges that the employees face. Only they can tell us that, and we have to have an avenue for them to come forward and tell us that. The only way they're going to do that, again, going back to the just culture, knowing they are not going to be penalized if they've made an honest mistake. And I know Tom Littner is sitting out there cringing because I use the words honest mistake. If someone makes a mistake, it's a mistake. And we don't penalize our employees for that, as long as they're willing to work with us and help us understand what led to them making that mistake. And by doing so, that uncovers risks that we otherwise wouldn't know about. These things would be driven underground and our employees would not come forward and tell us. And we wouldn't know about these problems, these latent issues, until something bad happens. So I lead to a good safety culture. We all have a safety culture. No matter what type of industry we're in, we all have a safety culture. But is it a good safety culture or is it a bad safety culture? Or is it somewhere in between? And I attest that the only way you will have a good, strong safety culture is with a solid reporting culture. For your frontline employees to tell you what's going on in the system before something happens. How do you get a strong reporting culture? Just culture. When someone does report an incident, especially if they've made an error, to handle them really the way you would want to be treated and get to the heart of why they made that mistake. What it comes down to is, and I say there's really a systems approach to examining accidents and incidents. It includes an analysis of the what happened, but it also includes an analysis of the human actions, but takes it beyond that. What was the intent of their actions? If an employee doesn't follow a procedure and it was simply an error, we forgive and we may coach them on that error. If it was a conscious decision on the employee's part to violate the policy or procedure or possibly the regulation, but they had good intentions, they didn't identify that they were increasing risk in the operation. They did it for all the right reasons, they just made a bad decision. We understand that, and we work with them to understand what led to them making that decision. What do we have in the system that's leading them down the wrong path? If it crosses over into the reckless area where the individual consciously makes that decision, knowing they're increasing risk in the operation, but they move ahead anyway, that's where we draw the line in the sand. So it's critical that we look at the intent. It could be the same mistake, but if it was one, it was unintentional, the other one was, I don't care, I'm doing it anyway, that's where we draw the line. Next slide. So it's really a balancing act on the punitive end of the scale. And I'm sorry, I don't have a pretty picture of a scale, but at the punitive end of the scale, the organization takes action against the employee based totally on what happened, based on the severity. Oh my gosh, that could have been really bad. We have to do something to this person. Individual accountability is the primary focus of the investigation. The opposite end of the spectrum is blame-free, where we focus so much on the system that we forget about the individual. In just culture, it's a balance in safety. We identify what happened, why it happened, and we still hold the individual accountable. Even if it was an error, I mentioned we might coach and counsel, that's holding that individual accountable. Or if it moves into the at-risk behavior realm or repeated errors, additional training is holding that individual accountable. What we don't do is give them, if the term we use in the US is a get out of jail free card. We just don't dismiss what they did. We do hold our employees accountable. The challenge is balancing that. We've all learned this over in our careers, I'm sure, and I'm going to steal a story from a great friend of mine, Tom, who's on the phone, I'm sure. When something goes wrong, everybody wants to know, the first question is, who did it? So we find the individual that did it, and we'll call him Eddie. Eddie did it, so we fire Eddie. So that fixes the problem, right? It only fixes the problem until it happens to the next person. So along comes Maria a month later doing the same task, and Maria makes the same mistake. We didn't fix the problem by getting rid of Eddie. In a just culture, if we identify that Eddie's really the problem, we work with Eddie. We might retrain him. We might move him into a different position where he's better suited. We may have to let Eddie go if he's just not fit for our organization. But more likely, by taking our time to understand what's wrong in the system through the just culture approach, we're going to improve the procedures, we're going to improve the policies, and not only prevent these incidents from occurring, improve safety, but it also drives efficiencies. The things that we find that improve safety also drive efficiencies in the organization. Just culture is what gets us there. Next slide, please. So at Delta Airlines and at Aeromexico as well, safety is absolutely fundamental to our success. And I think it was Captain Pont that had the slide of showing a safety statement or a safety policy from an organization. We have that in ours as well. But safety truly is the #1 priority of every Delta employee. It's fundamental to our success. It only takes one bad accident to destroy a company's reputation. And in these times, it only takes one bad incident or one bad accident to destroy a company. Nobody wants that accident to happen on their watch. No employee wants that to happen, and absolutely none of us in the safety realm want that to happen. So it comes back to understand why these things are happening and address them before we have that incident. Our SMS requires our employees to report when they identify a hazard. We are each personally responsible, if we identify a hazard in the system, to come forward with that. And of course, we get there by offering a non-punitive environment where no employee will be harmed for speaking up. We take it a step further. We expect our frontline employees that are working flights on the ramp, in the cabin, on the flight deck, to stop the operation. We call it a safety timeout. If they sense that something just isn't right, you stop the operation. On time doesn't matter at that point. You take that safety timeout and you speak up. And our motto at Delta is put safety first, always, above everything else. Next slide. So how do we come about our partnership with Aeromexico and Just Culture? So full disclosure, Delta is owns a large equity stake in Aeromexico. So we have a financial risk. We are an alliance partner. We have a risk to our brand and our reputation, and we're code-share partners. We're putting each other's passengers on each other's airplanes. We began the collaboration on ASAP back in early 2019, but it went back a little bit further than that when the conversations were first held. And one of the senior executives at Aeromexico had made a comment at one point about just culture. And he wanted to know more about just culture, which is very different than the Mexican culture in itself. In 2018, Aeromexico was very unfortunate. It had an accident in Durango. Fortunately, there were no fatalities, but it did result in a hull loss. And through that investigation, the information that came forward identified conditions in the system that led to some of the actions of the flight crew that day. And that's when the CEO of Aeromexico came forward and said, we will have just culture. So we had our first conversations with them early in 2019. Obviously, that shared goal of improving safety was first and foremost on the table, but how do we get there? At Delta, we're very fortunate to have a pilot who was very active in our labor group. in Washington and knows how to maneuver the political system. He happens to be Latino, so he knows a lot about the culture in Mexico. And we brought him in to work with us, and he's a Delta employee, but we brought him in to work with the team and Aeromexico, partnered with their labor group and the DGAC, which is now AFAC, their federal, their FAA in Mexico, to work with them and propose the idea of an ASAP, Aviation Safety Action Program, in Mexico. They had nothing of the kind. So after, it says, I say several months, but this was happening quite quickly in reality, meetings with their regulator, with the FAA, with the parties at Delta and the FAA, or I'm sorry, Delta and Aeromexico, we were able to get the buy-in. The regulator understood the importance of identifying the problems in the system and giving the employees an opportunity to come forward without fear of penalty. So fast forward, we kicked off their ASAP program in March of 2020, 3 days before COVID really took off. But leading up to that, we had to get the company ready. So we brought in, we again partnered with Aeromexico, brought in the Aloft group to conduct just culture training for Aeromexico and some leaders from Delta. And Aeromexico conducted a company-wide campaign on the changing culture. And it came straight from the CEO. We're going to change the way we do things at Aeromexico. When I first asked in ASAP training what the culture was like, would our pilots at Delta will come forward. When they make a mistake, when they land, they will pick up the phone and call their chief pilot and tell them they made a mistake. They'll file an ASAP report. They'll answer our questions and help us get to the root of the problem. When I asked if that happens in Mexico, the pilots in the room all looked at each other and said, no, we don't do that here. We don't say anything. You'll get fired. They literally turned the tables on that overnight by introducing Just Culture and the ASAP program. Next slide. So where are we now? On the Delta side, we have a Just Culture, but the degree to which it's working varies division by division. In our pilot division, we have a Just Culture in place. As I mentioned, pilots are very willing to come forward knowing they will not be penalized for reporting something. We're having varying degrees of maturity in the other divisions. But to me, our biggest win is in our we refer to it as airport customer service. Those people you see working at the gates, at the ticket counters, those people that are down on the ramp, loading the bags, fueling the airplanes, pushing the airplanes back. Traditionally has been a very punitive environment. When an employee makes a mistake, they get a written note in their file. If you get 3 things in your file, you're fired. Leadership has finally come to understand that through Just Culture, we will learn and be able to implement better policies, procedures to not only improve safety, but if you think about it from a purely operational standpoint, the cost of constantly recruiting and retraining is immense. And we have good employees. Let's continue to work with them and give them the opportunity to come forward and speak up. So we are currently, as I speak, I think it's November 19th, we are rolling out Just Culture to our first group of leaders from that organization. And they'll be bringing in people that are the ones working on the ramp, all the way up to the vice presidents in that division in a room together to talk about Just Culture and what that means. So we're moving rapidly away from that traditional punitive culture, now focusing on human behavior, safety, behavior-based safety. At Aeromexico, we're very pleased with the success. Despite COVID, the program has really taken off. We have strong buy-in from pilots and leaders, which is critical. You have to have buy-in from leadership. They've received over 140 reports from their pilots since March. They've already implemented several safety improvements. And now, as of as recently as the last few weeks, other Latin American countries are reaching out to Aeromexico. How did you do this? This is the first ASAP outside of the United States. How did you do this? How did you get your regulator to buy in and understand why just culture is so important? So I believe it's Colombia and Brazil are already have plans on the drawing board to start moving this forward within their own countries. So I leave you with one of my favorite quotes on the next slide as it relates to human behavior and just culture. And I won't read it to you. I will leave it to you to read this, but I think about this every day. And with that, I will take questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Trish. A really interesting
My pleasure.
Presentation. And it's great to hear that the mantra of just culture is making inroads on other continents. What I get from here is, well, I will have to check with Rudy if he didn't faint when he learned from you that he's not perfect.
Not the first time I've had to tell a pilot that.
Yes, and I also understand that the just culture made its way into the FAA after Tom left.
Yes.
So yeah. Anyway, let's look a little bit at the questions, and hopefully the Mexican wave will continue its progress into Latin America.
We
the
hope.
one that you started. So well, we have a couple of thank you, great presentation, thank you very much. So not exactly questions. So let's see the first one. This is jumping up. People keep sending questions. Stop sending questions so that I can read them. I appreciate the FAA's compliance program and its purpose, but when they don't take enforcement action, in some cases, it is also seen as regulatory capture. So striking the balance for a regulator is challenging. Damn if they do, damn if they don't.
Very good point. Very good point.
Yeah, it's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah. And just to clarify on that, enforcement action is not off the table. They still have that. But previously, when a certificated employee violated a regulation, enforcement action was the only thing the FAA had in its toolbox outside of ASAP. ASAP provided protection from that enforcement action. With compliance action, compliance philosophy, the FAA still has that option. But if the individual is willing and able to comply with the regulation, they will use compliance action, as opposed to someone who's not willing or not able. I share a story of an individual when he was being investigated by the FAA was not being cooperative. And the FAA said, do you realize I can take your certificate? And the individual said, I don't care. So guess what the inspector did? So they still have that. And it is a balance. It is a delicate balance. But we found, and the FAA has found, the more people are willing to work with us, we're willing to work with them to improve safety in the operation.
Yes, that's very interesting to hear, because we also present always just culture as a balance, and it's a fine balance.
Absolutely.
Another question, after a confidential report is filed, is there an investigation initiated? Can penalties or disciplinary actions be imposed?
So sure. So yes, depending on the type of report, the type of incident that's being reported, they are investigated. by at Delta, I can speak for Delta and Aeromexico. I can't speak for the other carriers. Those are investigated within the flight safety group. So that investigation is part of that aviation safety action report, and all of the information in it is protected. And again, as long as there was no criminal activity, drugs, alcohol, falsification of information, no reckless conduct, there is no penalty for the individual. We can use corrective action, again, going back to training, coaching, counseling, but no penalty.
Right. How do you change the approach of a company to safety when they focus mainly on cutting costs? And maybe the safety management would be punitive.
I will be very blunt. If I
was
sitting across from that CEO, you'll cut costs very quickly if you're not safe. You won't have any cost because you won't have any revenue.
Excellent point. Yes. If the system is flawed, does a person make a mistake per se, or should we take a broader approach to that? And I was thinking of that actually when you mentioned that what was his name? Eddie made a mistake, and of course maybe Eddie makes a mistake, and then Maria makes a mistake, but maybe the system is pushing them in working in such a way that it's not their own mistake, but it's simply the way the system works, and they're part of the system.
Right. And that goes back to what Rudy was referring to, I think, is we look at it, was it Rudy or it may have been Robin that mentioned, when someone makes a mistake, we look at it, would another individual with the same level of experience and training possibly make the same mistake given the same situation? But what we have to do is look at that individual at that moment in time, this made sense to them. Our job is to determine why it made sense to them. And oftentimes we find the why is all these organizational influences. It could be the way the policy procedure is written. It could be operational pressures. It could be financial pressures. But what exists in the system that put that individual at that moment in time to make that decision? And on occasion, you find it's just the individual. Well, then you address the individual.
I guess this is from someone in an airline. Our pilots think being coached in a ground school or simulator session is punitive. How can we deal with that?
Ground school and simulators are punitive?
So yes, that happens in other organizations. So it's not only it doesn't only apply to pilots, it applies to controllers as well. For example, when they are recommended some simulator sessions for coaching, and some of them perceive that as punitive, as a punishment per se, although they were not being punished, but the decision was, like you said, we have a discussion with Eddie, and maybe Eddie needs to have some simulator, needs to have some coaching. How do you deal with that?
Did that question come from ALPA in the US?
It comes from someone who's, the name is Anonymous Attendee.
Oh, I know who this is. No, and that's a challenge, honestly, that we continue to face. We do not view, when an employee participates in the voluntary reporting program, any corrective action that is assigned to that employee, perhaps we put a pilot back in the simulator, or a dispatcher might sit at the desk with an instructor. It's non-punitive from the standpoint of it's not, for a pilot, it's not a check ride or a line check. It's nothing that's documented in their file within the airline. It stays within ASAP, within the ASAP program. So if we put a pilot in a simulator, we're very specific. Let's say that it was his first time landing the jet in a crosswind, and he botched the landing and perhaps struck a wingtip. I'll use a real story. A new captain on a 747, his first landing, strong crosswind within limits, but he scrapes one of the engines. We accepted that into the ASAP program. We had the conversation with the captain, the other crew members understood what led to it. we gave that captain the opportunity to go into the simulator to practice crosswind landings. And that's all we gave him. The instructor is not allowed to do anything else other than what we specify, in this case, crosswind landings. And he does them until the instructor is confident he can land in a crosswind, and off he goes. Nothing goes in his training record, nothing goes in his file anywhere that he had that incident. So we have problems with some people view that as punitive. I view it as we're paying you to come in, so it's a bonus.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time and the fact that we have exceeded we have reached the end of this. But I'd like to take one more from our colleague in ICAO. Do you have a mechanism in place at Delta and Aeromexico to share with other operators in the United States or the world the lessons learned and mitigation action taken in response to the incidents reported and investigated?
So we have several mechanisms, and I'll try to be quick. Within the US, we participate in ASIAS, which is an information sharing program. We share our voluntary reports, we share our flight data, and we share lessons learned at a conference, normally every 6 months. As was mentioned earlier, there's no competition when it comes to safety, so we don't care about the color of the tail. If we identify a safety issue, we will reach out to our counterparts at other carriers. We also participate in STEEDS, and we are also part of the SASE group and the issue management team, and we share all of these lessons learned. Absolutely, it's critical that we share this information with each other. Many mechanisms to do that.
Thank you, Trish. A great,
my pleasure.
Again, round of virtual applause for you. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and seeing that Just Culture goes way beyond Europe. I know we have a global audience to these webinars, but sharing from your experience is really great. And we hope to see you sometime soon next year, whenever we get rid of this damn pest, back here in Europe, and continue to share all this knowledge about Just Culture.
I can't wait, and hopefully we'll have more lessons learned by then.
Yes.
Good lessons learned. Thank you all.
Thank you. We're moving swiftly on to the next presentation, which comes from the Italian air navigation service provider, ENAV. And we have today with us Rodolfo. Unfortunately, Maurizio could not make it. Maurizio is the ENAV safety manager, but he wasn't able to make it today. However, we have Rodolfo, who has an equally impressive experience in ENAV. He is responsible to lead the occurrence management process and has been an operational ATCO since 1987. He has spent the last 16 years expanding ENAV's learning from incidents and promoting safety and just culture. He is a graduate in communications, and what he wants is to help move the safety line forward. And we have heard from Rodolfo before, and we know that he's a great supporter of Just Culture and of safety. So Rodolfo, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me perfectly?
We can hear you, Rodolfo. Thanks.
Thank you, perfect. As Radu said, I apologize for my boss not being present. He is sick. No, don't worry, it's not COVID-19, it's just sick. When I was asked to make a presentation on Just Culture, I questioned myself, why me, why Italy? We are not the best, we are not the champion in Just Culture, other are. We are a country of civil law. This is not the perfect soil to grow a suitable Just Culture. I was answered, yes, but you are creative, you are good in getting around the problem. So, I hope it was so. What I'm going to present is our Just Culture system, and a small focus on the main issue. everyone encounter in implementing a just culture. Just few words on our just culture policy. Last update 10 September. It is written in 3 pages, and I can assure each sentence has been weighted not to be an advertisement, signed by CEO and supplemented by our SMS. What are the...
Sorry to interrupt you, Rodolfo. Do you want me to share your presentation? David speaking.
Is not shared?
Yet. Not yet. I can share it for you.
Yes, thanks. So I'm sorry.
You can go ahead. Tell me when you want to move to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was convinced that I was sharing, or at least I did.
Yes, sorry, David, if you can put it in not in presentation mode, because we see 2 slides.
Okay, let me
in full screen.
Let me try to redo the sharing.
Sorry, Rodolfo, I thought you were going to run it from your side.
I can try again to share the presentation.
Please go ahead. That would be easier if you do the sharing. Yes.
Try.
Okay, we can see it. Perfect.
Okay. I skip the window. So, as I said, I'm sorry, but I have the window overlapping in the comments. Okay. Our just culture fundamental are a description of why just culture is needed. It focuses a lot on human as a strength in the system and not the weakness. It addresses accountability, first of all for management, for being positive and proactive in safety, and secondly, employees.
Positive these days is...
Sorry?
No, carry on. Sorry, my microphone was
Secondly, employees, all employees, not only frontline, for operating responsibly. Contains just culture definition, exclusions, and also a statement on promotion, internal and as far as practicable external promotion. We want to be pragmatic. It's extremely easy to write a just culture policy with theoretical statements, less operated an effective and consistent just culture system. We analyzed all the typical problems in which a theoretical system gets stuck, that are who trigger the process, how to distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable, and how prevent that external just culture policy negatively influences our just culture policy. Issue 1, who triggered the process, assess human behaviors, and decide if yes or not, we are in front of an unacceptable or unacceptable behavior. In the years, there was an endless discussion on this. Everyone wanted to have voice in deciding, in judging. Human resources management, frontline managers, union, professional association, etc., etc. Our past experience, whenever there was a case, instinctive line management reactions, and answering this way is never good, and sometimes decision based on negotiation or on the needs, such as a summer shift or other, rather than just culture. Who trigger and judges? As I said, we are in a country of civil law, and civil law is the master, and what is written is more important than the objective. We are a country of chop logic. In Italy, we say split the hair in four. So if at the end of the day is matter of judgment, we questioned what are the virtues of a good judgment. Be impartial, independent, subject matter expert, with deep knowledge of the event, trained to assess human behavior, and mainly the first to lose face if the process fails. We answered safety department, also because very often only few subjects reach 3 virtues out of 6. So in our just culture, who trigger and decide? Basing on regulation 376, also considering not to disclose important safety information outside the investigation or the actor that have to know. So safety culture and our just culture policy and our SMS, we have 4 steps. Step 1, safety investigator or team make the first assessment and raise the hand, documenting and reporting why they raised the hand. Step 2, responsible for occurrence management, me, along to other senior investigator, makes a second documented assessment to confirm or not. Step 3, the safety post holder makes the third assessment. At this point, the presence of unacceptable can be confirmed or not. If confirmed, it is reported to the chief and for actions or decision following the rules contained in our disciplinary code. Issue number 2. What is acceptable or unacceptable? There are tens and tens of models, graphs, etc., to say it is acceptable or it is unacceptable. I wanted to use this cartoon, especially in this time. For instance, if I was asked by my teacher, do you have your homework? I can answer, oh, sorry, teacher, I lost my homework on the cloud. It is what happened in the present. Or, I'm sorry, my parents forgot to do it. Is it acceptable, unacceptable? So, in our just culture, excluding the classics psychoactive substances, willful violation with knowing causing harm, sabotage, etc., question number 1, not different from what Robin and Patricia said. How is considered the behavior from the vast majority of peers? Unacceptable? Yes, okay, we can start the process. Acceptable? Okay. Or do they really consider this acceptable? Do they locally really consider this acceptable? Maybe we have a big systemic issue. What is acceptable or unacceptable in our SMS? Acceptable if behavior was induced or consequence of set of rule, operational manual, internal procedure, etc., including their interpretation, operational practices, recognized by the vast majority of professionals, training, experience, working environment and tools, organizational or local culture, human performance limits, or system-induced or routine violation. A question, how many unacceptable do you expect in your system? How many fingers did you need to count in the last 10 years? Our experience, my experience is I needed one hand, only one hand. Issue number 3, how to protect years and years of growing jazz culture from external influences and even if small differences. During the State Safety Program Committee, the National Jazz Culture was written. Of course, it contains a general principle to answer the aviation, all the aviation needs. But our jazz culture was a little bit different. We spent 10 years in driving the jazz culture and to bring jazz culture where it is now. We consider to have an acceptable level of jazz culture. Immediately emerged that the national jazz culture could negatively influence our jazz culture. The solution we found was to write in the national jazz culture that if a certified organization has a jazz culture policy and can demonstrate to consistently operate the jazz culture, the state halt any assessment and do not interfere with the organizational jazz culture. Very fast presentation, and I'm ready to answer any question.
Thank you, Rodolfo. We can stop sharing now.
Yes, I'm trying to do, but I can't. I don't know why. So if you take control. Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. So I don't think we have many questions on you. We have a number of questions that were left from the previous presentation, but as we have said before, none of those questions will be lost. We are a little bit limited by the time, but we will try to answer them in writing. But I think it's interesting to hear that although you started somehow very, very modestly in saying that you are the wrong nation or the wrong organization to talk about jazz culture, exactly in the spirit of jazz culture, I don't think that there is such a thing as the right and wrong organization to talk about jazz culture. And for example, if we ask you what would be your specific challenges that you're facing with the implementation of jazz culture, certainly many can learn from that. So do you want to answer that?
Yes, I can honestly answer. As I said, we are in a country in which there is a Latin approach, a macho approach. We consider individuals responsible for everything, also for the system. So it is not a great soil to grow a jazz culture. We have many people from everywhere saying, okay, safety for me is my top priority, but at the end of the day, do you really believe in jazz culture? Can you prove you are acting for a jazz culture environment? Not many. We used psychology. Steven can learn, can correct me, but I experienced that whenever someone says something in which he doesn't believe, at the end it finishes in believing in what he was saying. So we used this, and we were able to expand around management, around external environment such as CIA or Minister of Transportation, etc., the jazz culture beliefs. So this was our main problem, to convince, to repeat 100 times that just culture is needed is useful. Trust me, we are in a country in which many sad events occurred, such as Genoa Bridge, Costa Concordia, Linate accident. They all have in common organization in which, at least at that time, the reporting culture, the just culture, was not part of the organization. INAV learned a lot from the past, from what happened 20 years ago. Others are going to do. So these are the typical problem. Another typical problem is, as I said, everyone wants to have voice in judging what is acceptable or unacceptable, without being an expert, without knowing anything about the event, without being independent in judging, but just for the right to judge. This was a problem. In Italy, we say too many, I'm sorry, I can't remember, too many rosters, when too many rosters sing, the day never come.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Roosters, yeah.
Roosters, sorry for, I apologize for my English. We preferred to cut this, choosing, okay, who is the one that has more to lose if we do not operate an effective just culture? Is the safety department. Is independent, has all the virtue to judge. So if it is a matter of judgment, let us judge.
Right. And you mentioned that there was an issue with the national just culture policy. There are a couple of questions who deal with that, like what is the problem? Has that improved, or are you doing anything to improve the national just culture in Italy? And that's also related to the judiciary, which doesn't have a reputation, a very good reputation in the area of just culture. So maybe you can briefly mention that, tackle the problems with national issue of just culture and the connection with judiciary.
State Safety Program Committee was extremely open to adopt a just culture policy, since Italy missed the national just culture policy. And they were convinced that they were open, but of course they had to make trade-off between all aviation organizations. There are differences between airport operator, airlines, NSP provider, military or civil provider. So a good just culture, national just culture policy was written, but of course we were worried. We kept an aptitude in interpreting just culture that was coherent around the years. We ran the risk that a different approach could negatively influence our just culture policy. And we were not available to permit to anyone to destroy what was built in 10 years. So the agreement to halt any external assessment, to stop, to impede the state make an assessment on what is acceptable or unacceptable in the organization, if we can demonstrate, we can prove we are correctly, honestly, consistently operating a just culture, was wonderful, because the state says, okay, I trust you as a provider, and we stop in deciding this. Second question was about judiciary. We heard the right reasons from two prosecutors. Yes, of course, there are huge problems in judiciary, at least at a theoretical level, because we have to say that, at least for incidents, in the years, we never had a problem. So theoretically, there is a big issue. Italian law do not recognize just culture. It's the opposite of just culture. And demonstrated this in all the trials they did. I personally assisted in Linate, in a Sardinian trial, in which air traffic controllers were convicted, even if, it's my personal opinion, they were not, they were innocent, but it's my personal opinion, of course. And what I found that the minimal basic concept of just culture were disregarded. So there is a problem. We tried several times to influence in a positive way the judiciary system, making encounter with, for instance, judicial national school. Some effect, positive effect were obtained, but what I found is that only one prosecutor out of 10, after the attempt to convince on just culture, were open to just culture concept. The prosecutors just say, you have the duty of care, you failed, it's your responsibility, you are guilty. I bring you an example. Once, following one of these conferences, we were eating on a table, there was a prosecutor complaining about the fact that he couldn't prosecute the pilots. He was a prosecutor of a small city in the south of Italy. The accident was the Palermo accident, in which Tuninter flight ditched and 15 people died. And he said, no, I had the responsibility to be a prosecutor, etc., and it's a pilot blame because it ended the fuel. You wouldn't have to trust in the instruments. He would have, he had to jump on the wings, open the tanks, put a piece of wood to check if the fuel, so it was guilty because he didn't this. My eyes were, I remained incredible. I tried to make argumentation. She continued to use a language such if I was the person in a trial, and I said, why you are using this kind of language? She continued. I stand up and I abandoned the table because it was impossible to find any link, any possible discussion on this. So yeah, it is a problem.
Thank you, Rodolfo. We can take one more question, but if you can be brief, we have a couple of minutes left. Actually, I will combine those questions to other questions in terms of failures of the professionals to follow the SOP. So we're not talking any unacceptable behaviors, but usual ones. And I will combine that with the possibility that such failures are because those frontline operators are pushed to the limits of the system by maybe the management who's pushing them, who's asking more and more of them, and they may even accept and tolerate some risks. So who is accountable if such things happen, and how do you treat those failures of the frontline operators?
As I said, according to our SMS, if there is a violation, and the violation is system-induced or is a routine violation, is not considered unacceptable, but it is considered a systemic issue. So, if during the interview or the investigation there are evidences that that behavior was forced, induced, accepted by the organization, we do not consider unacceptable, but we consider this as a systemic problem that must be corrected, that deserve a recommendation to be corrected. So this is the way we consider the behavior, unless there is the person was free to choose to take at risk behavior and was aware that was hugely increasing the risk without any justifiable reason. This is the condition. So we divide between inadvertent error, mistakes, at-risk behavior, or reckless behavior.
Once again, thank you very much, Rodolfo. Give our best regards to Maurizio, and we wish him a very, very quick recovery. Thank you for sharing with us your experience and for being overly modest. We think that everyone has something to share, and as I think Trish said it very, very well, that doesn't only apply to Rudy, but nobody's perfect, and we can always learn from each other. So thank you, Rodolfo.
Thank you to you.
We move on to the last couple of speakers of this afternoon. Dr. Eliana Greco, who holds a PhD in criminal law and is a lawyer and a postdoc research fellow at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore and Alta Scuola Federico Stella sulla Giustizia Penale di Milano. Her research interests include criminal negligence with high reliability organizations, and corporate criminal liability. She has paired up for this presentation with Nicola Romano, who is an active air traffic controller. He spent 3 years working in Milano Linate Tower. Then in 2013, he moved to the Area Control Center, where he is an instructor and works full-time for the training office. He is one of the professional association's board members, Controller Professional Association in Italy, board members, head of the legal commission, and he's also a member of the Eurocontrol Just Culture Task Force. And he holds a master's degree in international relations from the University of Torino. So Nicola and Eliana, if you are ready, and you can switch on your camera so that we can see your beautiful faces as well.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
So the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Radu. Good afternoon, everyone. And okay, thanks for the kind introduction as well. We'll be talking about the criminal liability of air traffic controllers within the general criminal negligence framework, and wondering whether it is time for a new approach. This is quite in line with what Robin Good said about Switzerland. And indeed, there are some similarities which we might expand upon later in the presentation. I will do some of the introductory speech, then I'll leave the floor to Eliana for the legal details. So first of all, I work for ANACNA, which is the Italian Air Traffic Controllers Professional Association. We are a lively bunch of people. As you can see, we're not for profit. First of all, we're non-partisan. We are not a union, technically. We only deal with, and of course, we're apolitical. We deal with technical and professional issues of all ATS professionals, so both air traffic controllers and, for example, flight information service officers as well. We promote safety and efficiency with our activities, and generally speaking, we do strive for a continuous improvement of air traffic management. So what is it with ANACNA and Just Culture? We we work for, of course, I work for ENAV, we work for ENAV, and we work therefore for a high reliability organization, which constantly manages risk and manages complexity. At the same time, and despite all scientific evidence, air traffic controllers are indeed human beings. So we are prone to making mistakes one way or the other. And the system therefore needs to have some sort of tolerance for some kinds of errors. And although I understand not everyone agrees on this definition, what we do accept are honest mistakes. We tend to keep, of course, willful violations and gross negligence out of the scope of just culture. But there is a need for just culture as a whole in our operations. So we, of course, haven't started today to deal with just culture. It's a long journey. I'm reproducing here a leaflet for a conference that was held in 2007 at the University of Udine, which is in northeastern Italy. And the topic was human error in aeronautical activities. And the subtitle is Beyond Blame Culture. So it's been a long time, basically, so we are dealing with this. Of course, as Rodolfo mentioned, we have a few cases in our past, namely Linate, namely the Cagliari accident in the latest years. So we have quite, unfortunately, some experience in dealing with judiciary reaction to negative adverse events in our sector. However, some results were already there in 2013, where thanks to the efforts of ANACNA and other stakeholders in the Italian aviation sector, there was an amendment of the Italian Navigation Code in order to include our operation manuals in the recognized sources of law. At the same time, again, as Rodolfo mentioned earlier, there was a training module held at the Scuola Superiore della Magistratura, which is the Judiciary Training Center, and also a prosecutor visit to Rome ACC. We as an ACNA are a member of the Eurocontrol Just Culture Task Force. Several members, including myself, attended the prosecutor expert course held by Eurocontrol, IFATCA, and ECA. And finally, 2 of our members were picked for the Eurocontrol experts list, which was drawn up late last year. So what is it with the issue with the judiciary, with the cases that we faced in the last years? Well, I borrowed these. Steve Schauber kindly agreed to let me borrow these slides, this slide actually, because the thing is there is a huge gap between how we see actually how we perform our work. So work is done. I think we're all familiar with this idea, but as you see, there is a significant gap between work is done and work is judged. So the way that our work is judged by the judiciary does not quite align with the way we do see our work. And so it is true, we do have some negative experience in the past in Italy, we've had that, but it's 2020 now. Linate and Cagliari are a few years back now. So let's try to, as a society, of course, do better and bridge the gap between how we see our job and how the judges and the law see our job. The question is, how can we do that? Well, we didn't quite know, but the idea was, of course, to talk to the judges, etc. But we saw this opportunity when new laws were approved on medical liability in Italy in the past few years. And I'm referring to the Balduzzi law in 2012 and the Gelli Bianco law in 2017, which set new criteria for criminal liability in the medical sector. And we were happy to see that there were some just culture elements in them. For example, a reference to the role of guidelines and good practices in establishing whether some medical, in this case, behavior was acceptable or not. So we wondered, is this worth exploring for our business as well, for our sector as well? And we said, okay, let's stop discussing, let's stop complaining and whining about how the judges are the bad guys and we're the good guys. And let's ask the experts on the subject. So that's basically how we started our work with the Università Cattolica di Milano, and namely the ASGP, which is a center for studies on criminal law within Università Cattolica. And they have a huge experience on medical liability. And we asked them to start this research on our sector as well, wondering whether that kind of rules was applicable to us as well, potentially, or not. We are not the experts, so the answer is not for us to say. And we did ask them to provide a study on this and to draw conclusions. I leave the floor to Eliana Greco, who is the leader of this project from the Cattolica side, and she'll explain the legal details.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you very much to the organizers of this event. Good afternoon to everyone. Well, I will start with a brief introduction. So, the criminal response to the major accidents, including the aviation ones, is one of the most important issues of the modernity. So it requires a multidisciplinary analysis, not only from a legal or criminal perspective, but an analysis that is able to keep into account the complex organizational context and the special risks that air traffic controllers have to manage within their activities. And this is a very, very relevant issue relating to the mechanism of judicial assessment of responsibility in case of adverse events such as an aviation accident. So, given these preliminary findings, as Nicola said, the Alta Scuola Federico Stella sulla giustizia penale, that is a research institution within Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Milano, and ANACNA, conducted during the 2 last years a research on the criminal liability of air traffic controllers. Well, the study of the conditions that can expose air traffic controllers to criminal responsibility or that can preserve them from it have a particular importance. So the analysis of the dynamics of criminal negligence related to harmful events in this field presents not only a legal relevance, but also social, cultural, and operational one. It represents a paradigmatic context for a more general thinking of the imputation criteria and responsibility in relation to macro adverse events that can occur within an organization with high risk potential. So, in particular, what were the goals of this research? As we said at the beginning, the research aims first of all to analyze the criminal negligence standard in the case of an adverse event occurred within a high reliability organization. And as Nicola said, in sociological studies, these are the organizations that operate in a highly complex context while keeping a high standard of reliability, safety, effectiveness, and efficiency. But also the research aims to look for and to develop legislative solutions and innovation within this field. But what is the problem? What is the issue of liability assessment in specific technical fields? So the risk is to incur, as often happened, in liability assessment that the result in forms of position responsibility, the so-called responsabilità da posizione in Italian legal framework, such as a responsibility based on the fact of holding, because of one's qualifications or specific skills, a top or preeminent role in the management of a certain risk. And this leads, in many cases, wrongly to believe that the individual in question is always in the condition of being able to avoid the production of a certain fact, or to be able to reduce the risk of verification of a certain event. Well, this is a totally wrong approach, which does not consider the peculiarities of the context and of the organization that characterize the profession of air traffic controllers. So, just a few words about the research methodology. It followed an interdisciplinary methodology which includes sociological and criminological acquisitions, as well as the study of criminal law relating to similar sectors, the medical ones first of all. And constantly keeping into account the indication coming from international and European law. Moreover, in the first month of the research, also an empirical analysis was undertaken with two types of interviews. Qualitative interviews, with the precious collaboration of many ANACNA representatives, aimed at acquiring knowledge relating to the context within the air traffic controllers operate and according to what procedures. Then a quantitative analysis which involved 169 air traffic controllers. And then a one-day operational room visit in Milano ACC. To give some example of the methodology, the questions, both in the qualitative interviews and in the quantitative ones, concerned, for example, the greater or lesser frequency of ordinary risk situations compared to emergency ones. The procedures to be followed in the case of unexpected threats, but also the ability to decrypt so-called red flags and influence on this profile, on this aspect of the training received, such as skills, courses, and their duration. Then the impact of team working on the correct application of the procedures, and very important, the times available to take a relevant decision that is very, very short. Finally, the methods of interaction with other professionals, the pilots, the airport manager, firefighters, and medical facilities, and the role of new technologies in carrying out ordinary or extraordinary activities. Given these premises, we moved on to the analysis of an emblematic case of aviation accident, which is the so-called Cagliari accident. That is a very relevant example of failure to take into account the peculiarities that characterize the activity of the air traffic controllers. Well, I will very briefly sum up the facts. A Cessna aircraft which took off from Roma Ciampino Airport, bound for Cagliari Elmas, collided with a rock called Bacumalu, located in the mountain of the Sette Fratelli in Sardinia, in Italy. The victims of the accident were 6, the 3 crew members and the 3 members of the medical staff in charge of transporting the human organs. In particular, the pilot of the Cessna communicated to the air traffic controllers the intention to make a visual approach and not to use the instrumental landing system. The controllers asked him if the condition allowed to keep the necessary separation space from obstacles outside the aircraft. And the pilot gives them a positive feedback. So they authorized the visual approach for the runway. But during the descent, contacts with the Cessna aircraft were interrupted and it collided with the Bacumalu mountain and completely disintegrated. About this case, the Italian Corte di Cassazione, that is the Italian Supreme Court, convicted the 2 air traffic controllers involved in the fact for the crimes of manslaughter and aviation disaster. So very briefly, that was the fact. And during our research, we analyzed this accident from a juridical and criminal perspective with special reference to some elements such as the duty of care, the so-called posizione di garanzia in Italian criminal law, that is the duty of a certain individual to prevent the occurrence of harmful events, but also the criminal negligence criteria and the role of precautionary rules that are those are particular specific rules aimed to prevent harmful events in the whole structure of criminal negligence. I will not speak about the specific legal aspect of the matter because the time available is very short and the framework is very complex. But I will say what is the problem, the issue with this case. The problem is that in this judgment, the air traffic controllers are described as having a navigation police role. So, as if they could always face and minimize every risk, even when behavior other than that held was not possible. So, what to do? We tried to elaborate rational and effective regulatory solutions that are able to, first of all, to limit the risk, indeed a very serious one in business with high risk potential, the risk of over-criminalizations. So we looked for not only best practice, but also for procedures, models, and prospects for regulatory innovation. So the aim is to work with other stakeholders finds at the ignorance of the elementary principles of a specific professional activities or of a certain specialization fields. I have finished and I'll switch back to Nicola for some closing remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eliana, for those legal details. I'd like to echo and refer to what the judges Montagni and Scarabello mentioned yesterday about the fact that they're not our enemies, they're not our friends either, but they need new tools and the right tools to do their job, just like we do. So I think the key issue here is to provide all stakeholders, so both operational staff and the judges, with the right tools to do their jobs. On the one hand, frontline operators need clear and unambiguous rules and, quite the opposite of what has just been said, a well-defined perimeter for their liability. And on the other hand, judges and prosecutors, whether be they good guys or bad guys, they need, in any case, new legislative tools to allow for a new approach to liability assessment, especially in countries, as Rodolfo Volpini mentioned, such as Italy, civil law countries like ours. These, of course, requires a collaborative approach between stakeholders. And this includes, of course, operational staff, universities, and this is what we're doing at this time. We need to work with prosecutors and judges, of course, and why not with lawyers? They are a very important stakeholder from this point of view. And of course, this has to reach legislative bodies in the proper way, just like our Swiss friends are doing. So of course, we need to elbow bump, no handshakes, elbow bump, and we need to work together to do this. And especially because in these days, we have a few elements like the likely growth in traffic demand, which is going to happen after the pandemic. Of course, we all hope that this is going to be a quick solution. An increased focus on human factor aspects in our profession, the widespread deployment of new technologies such as remote towers, ever-increasing levels of automation, and the interaction with autonomous systems such as ARPAs, and also in perspective, the introduction of AI in operational contexts. All of these factors make it so that the right time to get a new legislative framework is now. And it is not, I very much agree with what Rudy Pont said earlier on, it is not time to roll back on what we already know. This is the right time to stop for a moment and think about what can be done in the future. So the next steps for us will be the publication of this research in relevant criminal law journals in Italy and possibly abroad with the translation. And of course, whenever the pandemic situation permits, we will present this in person in a dedicated conference. At the same time, we'll keep raising the awareness on the issue of just culture and criminal liability among elected officials and among institutions in general in Italy. So stay tuned. Thanks very much for your attention, and please reach out if you have any questions, or if we have time, we'll be happy to take them now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eliana and Nicola. We have a couple of minutes maybe for a few questions. And what I would also like to know if this research will be published, the results, hopefully in English, because I suppose it's conducted in Italian, but it would be obviously very interesting to have the results published in English. And with your permission, we might also want to reproduce it in our Just Culture repository, which is on Skyberry for a wider, perhaps, audience, because as I see you intend to publish it in some journals, but maybe not everybody has access to those journals, and it's something that is worth being known by the wider community.
Definitely, Radu, absolutely. As I mentioned, the idea is to publish in Italian first, but we have every interest to translate this and make it so that everyone can access it. And of course, the Just Culture repository. And I'm looking forward to working with you and the Just Culture Task Force to disseminate this in English, of course.
And I can offer our support if you need translation in English. Obviously, we have a translation service in Eurocontrol, and if needed, we can support that translated in English.
Thanks very much. We'll get in touch.
Yeah. Okay, so let's deal with a couple of questions. There is one very long statement and maybe a bit of a question. I'm not sure it's finalized. What do you think of the extension of the guarantee position to some aeronautical operators? I suppose the question is, because this is in a context where we heard yesterday from our friends in the Italian judiciary that the judges apply laws and don't really distinguish between slight or serious negligence, but on the other hand, you have the guarantee position covered for the employees also because of that jelly law in 2017.
My answer to that, if I understand the question correctly, is what do we think of this huge position of guarantee that has been established by the Italian Supreme Court? Well, of course, we don't agree with this. It is far from what we've been trained to do, and it is far from what the whole system needs, in my view. So the direction of the research is exactly to define a more precise perimeter for our liability. And the direction we were doing this is to distinguish between cases of gross negligence and slight negligence. So, of course, the judges do not make this distinction because the Italian criminal system currently does not allow them to do so. So we need to provide them and maybe work with them if they're happy to do so with the new tools that allow them to make that distinction in the future.
Thank you. Legal reforms are needed for that, and the political will is needed to achieve those legal reforms. And there's a question whether the new manifesto can achieve that. It's not the objective of the manifesto to change the political will, because we need that cooperation. But we cannot change the political will, and it isn't really our objective. We just want to educate, and we want people to assume that. And I don't know how you feel about this,
Nicola. I do agree. I mean, anything can help, but the manifesto's goals are not to influence or whatever. But yeah, of course, when the political side is involved, you need to how can I say this? Need to make them happy to work with you and for you. So they have to have some interest in what happens. From that point of view, I would say in the Swiss case, it was unfortunately, and let me stress this, unfortunately, easier to talk about just culture in public. Because of course there were these near misses and sentences, of course, and convictions. So there was something to talk about, and there was something to talk about in the late 2010s, I mean 2018, 2019. I like to think that the society is probably more mature today than it was maybe 10 years ago. So it is probably easier now, and I hope I can say this for my country as well, to talk about just culture in public. And yeah, but of course it's a long process.
Yes, and the last question, and maybe Eliana is better placed to answer that, because we have to do with different legislation between the countries, members of the European Union, individual organizations operating in different countries, may be facing different environments, whereby in one place they may be exonerated, in another place they may face prosecution. So how about a proactive approach at EU level? It's something that obviously we try to do from Eurocontrol. It's something that the Just Culture Task Force has tried to do to some extent. But I would like to hear maybe the opinion of a legal expert from either yourself or maybe Eliana, who can pick up that question.
Yeah, thank you. But my idea is that probably an harmonization of criminal systems of the member states about on this point is very, very necessary to limit the hypothesis of responsibility and in particular of criminal responsibility in a case, to the case very, very close to the gross negligence. So the idea is, if possible, an harmonization on the level related to European law, so an intervention in this direction. Probably not easy, but possible, I think.
Thank you very much. And with this, I'm afraid we are running out of time. So we need to draw to a close of this webinar. Again, we had quite a lot of questions. Not all of them were answered, but none of them will be lost because we are saving the questions in the question and answers section. I'd like to thank, again, everyone who participated actively in this webinar. I'd like to thank everyone who simply tuned in and listened to, because one of the important aspects of these webinars is the education, is spreading the mantra of the just culture. And of course, many changes need to be implemented in a number of places, but some of them can only happen relatively slowly. So it's a long process, which I think was mentioned by a couple of the speakers. And so I'd like to thank the support that we got from ICAO and some of the other organizations like the European Cockpit Association, IFALPA, IFATCA. And of course, don't forget that the third part of the webinar will continue tomorrow at the same time, starting at 2 o'clock Central European time. And we're looking forward to seeing you again, a very long list of attendees, and also to hear from a number of other distinguished speakers tomorrow. And very importantly, please share with us your experiences, share with us your questions, share with us your problems, because this is something that will help us making progress. We may not have the answers, but at least it gets us thinking. I'd like also to thank David in Jans for supporting this with the infrastructure. And again, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a good evening, or have a good day, or good night, or whatever time is where you are. Bye-bye.